Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here today to talk about alternatives to ash. We, as a company, J. Frank Schmidt and Son, has been working on coming up with alternatives of ash for since 2002, when our customers in Michigan were blindsided by this nasty little insect, and it's been rolling ever since. So our company has lived with emerald ash borer for, from a distance for 20 years. The first few years, it cost us about $6 million in sales, just right off the bat. And our customers, who had their fields full of beautiful ash trees, as it progressed across the country, each state, we kind of lived through the sorrow of those customers who lost their ashes. Back in the day, we grew about 18 cultivars of ash, and it was at least a quarter of our business, which was part of the problem. We didn't learn from the loss of elms to Dutch elm disease. We learned a little, but we weren't paying that much attention collectively. But this is a good knock in the head, and I really think that the emerald ash borer arrival 20 years ago has contributed a lot to our company's efforts to diversify our product line, which I'll talk about a little more. This, by the way, is our farm in Milton Freewater. Those are the Blue Mountains behind us, about 400 acres where we grow some of the more heat and drought tolerant trees. So we've been hit with a double whammy with emerald ash borer coming here and climate change arriving too. And it's also an opportunity for us to plan and plant for an ashless future and for a hotter, drier climate of exchanges, extremes, and it's going to be hotter and drier, and it's also going to be cooler and wetter, which we sure experienced that this spring with our wet spring. So do we replace ash with trees from the arid Southwest and California? Well, not so fast. Yes and no. We're still going to have cold winters and desiccating winds. And having grown up in Troutdale, Columbia River Gorge, I know how those winds desiccate. And we're going to have snow and ice storm events. We've had snow in April that really and ice in the wintertime that are really devastating to all sorts of varieties of trees. So we need to work on storm resilience as well. So we need to choose trees that can handle soil extremes as well as weather extremes. It's going to be too dry and too wet. It kind of sounds like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Too hot, too cold. So what do we do about it? Well, the experts tell us plant a broad mix of genera, species, and cultivars. This is the little shot I took. I think it was during a Friends of Trees board meeting, maybe, from the brewery blocks, maybe it seems like. Anyway, showing our, kind of a lot of Norway maples and ash and all sorts of different things. But many of these, much of the green that you see here is probably going to need to be replaced in the next 20, 30 years. So what have we been doing about it as growers? Well, we've been ramping up our diversity. And trying to grow to meet the demands for species diversity. And just to prepare for this, I dug through the archives and found a 1982 catalog for J. Frank Schmidt and Son. And boy, was it an education for me. I've only been around there since '94. By the way, Schmidt's started growing trees in 1946, right in Troutdale, Fairview area. So, and the family is third generation and really devoted to continuing and diversifying. So what in 92 or 82, we grew 19 genera, and that includes 5 that are no longer offered. One of those being Russian olive and some tall hedge, some real interesting rhamnus, some real interesting trees that we don't offer anymore. And we had 109 species and cultivars. Well, fast forward, 20, 30 years forward, this is hot off the press, by the way. We got them in yesterday. This year, we tallied it up, and 2023, we're up to 64 genera and 450 species and cultivars. So I was surprised that the number was that high. I knew we grew. So, folks who think we only grow maples and crabapples and birch and ash, that was pretty much the story in 1982. Those were our big items. We had 3 oak species, no elms, no ginkgos. And so it's really changed a lot. And so we're doing the best we can. Trouble is, the hard part is that those first, the ones that we listed are the ones that are easy. So the hard ones are the ones that are the more diverse, or they'd be more available in the marketplace. So what do we plant? So today you have a lot more choices. Carpinus betulus is a great, probably underrated tree for its drought and heat tolerance. This one is our Emerald Avenue, which, of course, Maclura from Oklahoma. The Osage orange, Australia, is an fairly unusual tree that has really great heat and drought tolerance as well. So I'll just run through this really quick. Emerald Avenue, it's of Mediterranean origin. A lot of people don't know, think of it as a Northern European or a European cultivar or species, but it runs all the way down. Its range runs all the way down into Turkey and Italy, southern Italy, over into the Stan countries, Turkmenistan. And this one is from that southern provenance, and it's just going gangbusters as far as being a dry country tree. Osage orange, western Oklahoma, pretty hot, pretty dry, pretty alkaline, and it's doing real well. Matt, I kind of pioneered planting that with BES, and I've been keeping an eye on some of the trees that are doing really well in the city. Autumn Treasure is our cultivar of hop hornbeam that loses its leaves all at once. So oaks, elms, zelkova. The oaks are bur oak and the southern oaks. We at this point are not growing any of the evergreen oaks because of the weather extremes and just too risky right now as a crop, but we're sure looking at them. Elms, this is summer elixir elm. You arborists will love to know the story on this one, is that Jim Barberinus was given some seedlings by George Ware, and he's been looking at it for about 30 years, and he decided, this is a pretty good tree, so he brought it to us for introduction. So, and Zelkova, great family of trees. Got to tell you a little story of a resilient red maple. If you were here at this conference in 2013, along with Andy and with a couple of Friends of Trees staffers and City of Seattle folks, I pulled a couple of trees out of the cooler, including that big red point maple. And we were joking right there at the little thing outside the happy hour. I said, this tree it just hasn't gotten the memo. It doesn't know it yet that it's dead, because it was June, threw it in the back of the pickup, drove down here, sat out all day, threw it in the pickup, took it home. A couple days later, the buds still look pretty good. Soaked it in a wheelbarrow full of water for a few days, and then Neil stuck it out on a drip line in our little Treeforia nursery, and 10 years later, the day before last, the property we were growing it on was sold, tree's still there, and look how it's grown. So the bare root tree on the right of the picture, that's the red point maple that 10 years later, that was right here in this room. So it wasn't giving it up. It wasn't ready to die. Good. There are some red maples that are not drought tolerant, like they're represented to be. So that's the power of cultivars, is that we're selecting for heat and drought tolerance. Oops, I'm out of time. Okay, climate forward. Got to show you this. We've actually got a tree form. Well, we can't go back. Tree form heptacodium. So that's the kind of things we're doing. We're trying to find trees that'll work in heat, drought, and that won't get chewed up by emerald ash borers. So planning for an ashless future, talk to us. What could you do? Talk to us, visit nurseries, know what's available from propagation nurseries like ourselves. A lot of good ones out there besides us. Don't expect street-ready trees of desirable sizes and species to be available off the rack. Plan ahead. Don't plant 150-year trees in 30-year holes and expect them to be long-lived. You got to plan ahead. Contract. It's a whole new world for us too. So communication is going to be key for this great demand that is greatly going to outstrip the supply just nationally. So plan, like I'm talking plan 7 years ahead, and increase your buying power by teaming up with others. So I think that's going to be a great new frontier. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are the Stormwater and Sewer Bureau for the Portland, in addition to the tree planting work. That's why this is our standard. You see clean rivers and pipes and things like that. So we do a lot of other stuff. It's not just tree planting, obviously. Some of you probably know us from our long partnership with Friends of Trees, all the years of street tree planting, getting a few thousand trees in the ground every year. We've moved beyond that now. We're focused mostly on private properties and commercial, industrial, multifamily in particular. We're really focused on the willing partnerships, building relationships, and planting on private properties takes more work. It's not just right in the planting strip. There are the challenges of utilities and things like that, street signs, street lights, but we find a lot more opportunity on private properties, but people are also a lot more particular. So there's a lot of site visits back and forth and forming these, what we really consider mini partnerships with each property owner. So I'm going to talk about some alternatives to ash, in particular some that have performed really well for us. First, a few smaller species, Chinese pistache, and these are all, the middle one's not one of ours, but the one on the left that's up on North Lombard, they've performed really well for us. And these are all trees that have maybe some similar leaf shape, they're deciduous, scale, there's some similar qualities to ash trees, in my opinion. Zelkovas, that's just another one up in my neighborhood. Specifically City Sprite Zelkovas, one we've planted a lot of. I think we got one right over there, ready for a home. And then Amarmachia, another smaller to medium scale tree that's performed pretty well. Others, a little bit larger, Black Tupelo, which we've found is great fall color. It appreciates a little bit of summer watering if you want to really get a bigger canopy out of it. Elm cultivars, Jefferson, and Emerald Sunshine are two of our most commonly planted ones, and then hardy rubber tree. Now moving on to talk about some other types of trees which are performing at the top of our list, and that's why we're planting more of them. Baker cypress, an amazing tree from Southern Oregon, hard to find, but has been really successful up here. Coast live oak, Quercus agrifolia, along with various other western oaks. Nancy touched on that a little bit, the cold hardiness, and so this gets into where are the acorns collected, what elevation, and in the range of these different trees. But overall, we've found the western oaks have performed really well, in particular out of the evergreen oaks. This one in the middle is at the International Tree Grove, 42nd Lombard, a really cool place to go check out trees. And then maybe my favorite tree, one of my favorite trees in the whole city is in my backyard. This is an Oregon mist, Ceanothus thyrsophloris. Small scale, it's a native evergreen. At this time of year, it's covered with pollinators. It's in bloom. This is about the same time, May, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Mine is probably 23, 24 feet tall right now and maybe 18 feet width. So it's got a nice, and it does take, Thyrsophloris tends to be more upright. And then if you collect from the right plant that's more upright and a little bit of training, you can actually get these into really cool little trees. One of the knocks on them is, well, other than their shrubs or their ground covers, they don't live that long, but I think part of that is because they get thrown into irrigated landscapes and they don't really want that. Mine's 14 years old now, and if it's dead when I get home tonight, I'm going to plant another one right away because I love the tree and it was worth every second of it. So one of my little favorites there. And these are actually available. You can find them. Sistas Nursery's growing them, and they're out there more commonly than you might think. Some other top performers that we're planting a lot of, the Willamette Valley ponderosa pine, making sure we know our seed source, where they're actually coming from. They're not just, in my early days of the tree program, we've all learned a lot through our careers and not knowing where to source. There's a lot of ponderosa pines out there, and I remember buying them from some guy who had bought a field of them, and asked him, he's like, oh yeah, I think they're Willamette Valley. Like that wasn't very reassuring. So I've now go to sources where I really know where these trees are coming from. Incense cedar, canyon live oak, Quercus chrysolepis, our one like true native evergreen oak tree, like tree form oak to Oregon. Silverleaf oak, Persian ironwood, strawberry tree, cool, smaller scale if you're familiar with it. It's kind of a little gumdrop type tree, so it's not the best fit for everywhere, but it's performed really well. I remember seeing them in San Francisco and really loving them in parking lots and streets. And so we plant those in smaller spaces. Gray smoke tree with high on our list. That's a hybrid between two different smoke trees and crepe myrtle. So those last few are smaller scale, but have performed well in the heat, and then also in winter, they've pulled through some of our planting and tree sourcing. I was going to talk a little bit about that. I'm happy to talk to anyone afterwards, but not wanting to let the local nursery, this is not a shot at Nancy, but like kind of steering our own path and not letting what's out in the nursery industry dictate what we plant. We wanted to source trees, grow them, work with nursery partners, ensure our source of quality, quantity, the types of trees and diversity. So I'm happy to talk more about that. A couple cool projects really quick. International Tree Grove, cork oaks there, Northwest Industrial area, that's a madrone, ODOT highway plantings. And in closing, this is one of my favorite projects, the Northwest Industrial Railroad, an abandoned railroad corridor where we planted. That's a canyon live oak, ponderosa pines. Recently, Trees for Life Oregon did 2 stories, one about climate resilient trees in Portland, and then just this past week, a few days ago, one that focused on our private property program, featuring a couple of our cool projects. So check that out. Here's my information. Call me whenever. Thank you.
I'm going to quickly run through today my process for how I choose trees for the park projects that I do. And just to put a little background, my main goal is I choose the trees and plan replanting projects for all of our parks. So if Urban Forestry takes down a tree in the city of Portland and it's in a park, it eventually comes to my desk for removal. So I look at the city as like a property by property basis and also utilizing the data and our climate as a whole to decide what our next generation of trees in our parks will be. And a caveat to this is your goals in tree planting may be different, so always start with your goals and go from there. So when I start in the city of Portland, I begin with our plant hardiness zone map. And I think this is really important because our plant hardiness is defined by those low temperatures. So there's a lot of talk about our future high temperatures, future precipitation. But as we learned this winter, we are still going to get some really cold lows. So even though I might be wanting to choose species from California or other Mediterranean climates, paying attention to those hard frosts that we can still get every few years is going to be really important moving forward. Next, University of Maryland has this great climate prediction tool that allows you to click on your city or a city near you, and it'll give you what they think your climate will be in about 60 to 70 years. So for Portland's case, they think that our future climate in terms of the summer highs and summer precipitation will be much like Sacramento. So you can expect, instead of having our highs being around 80 to 85, they're expecting average highs of around 100 degrees. And if we're losing 88% of our summer precipitation, that essentially means no rain in the summer. So we need something that can handle that zone 8 to zone 7 cold temperatures, as well as our future climate that they predict for us. So from there, I will take our climate, and that is going to be different for your different cities, and look for similar ecosystems that are nearby. And I can say I use this both for considering assisted migration for trees from native environments, as well as trees that tend to do well in similar areas. And I think that JFS, they do a lot of this out testing in many of these other areas. So for us, we are in this zone, this area 7, the Marine West Ecosystem Forest. So I'm going to be looking at trees that are native to or do well in those Mountain Wests, the Cascades, the Sierras, the Northern Rockies, trees that do well in the Mexican Rockies or Southern Rockies. We also have seen good success. Matt mentioned the silverleaf oak, and we have other trees that come from those desert sky islands, that 12 in Arizona, New Mexico. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly to some of you, that Midwest, that area 9 within our country, those trees have to handle really high, dry summers in places like Oklahoma, as well as some of those really cold and desiccating winds in the wintertime. As far as the true California Mediterranean trees, I think both Matt and Nancy mentioned this, some of the trees in those areas might not be cold hardy enough. So coast live oak does great, but if we get a really hard frost, we can see some dieback, versus surprisingly things like Torrey pines are reportedly able to handle down to zone 7. So if we're choosing trees from those evergreen Mediterranean environments of California, I'm more looking at those as a case-by-case basis because they don't have those typical winter lows. So that brings us to how I apply that information to each park property, and this is where things might be different for you. So in general, I'm trying to trend each park to at least 50% native trees, having a good mix of evergreen and deciduous trees. We do utilize that no more than 5% of species, 10% genus, 20% family rule for our properties. But that does break down sometimes when you want to make sure you're preserving really important species so that pollinators can move through the parks. And also if we're trying to consider assisted migration, because as you know, we don't really have nearly as many species in our native ecosystem as we would have in our kind of built environment. We also want to consider the cultural values, both indigenous and immigrant communities. Just yesterday, I was talking to someone who was talking about the tea pickers grabbing all the linden flowers for getting tea. So even non-native trees have an important cultural value. And then I look at the site-specific conditions. And I have a little more flexibility with this than our street tree program because they have such a higher volume of trees. So they tend to only be able to, they can't choose each individual site. So applying that to one of our park properties, this is the inventory of Bloomington Park. You will see that Bloomington Park is 74% non-native deciduous trees, and 46% of the trees at that park are Quercus rubra. We do have some Gary oaks there, but Cupressaceae is suspiciously absent. So it should be no surprise that when I chose our species mix for our volunteer planting at that park, all of the trees were either native, nearly native, or from some of those Mountain West environments, and all in the Cupressaceae family. So giant sequoia, coast redwood, and Arizona cypress. This is just a quick slide to show that is my planting list. All of this will be available digitally. And then this is our yard tree giveaway planting list and our street tree list. And this is really to show you that we're much more dependent upon the native species in our open spaces and lawn areas because there are some more limiting factors when it comes to street tree planting. Finally, I would like to go and highlight that site selection really matters. We don't have a huge amount of data on long-term success and monitoring, but we've been told a lot about western red cedar decline, but you'll notice at the bottom of this slide here, all of the western red cedars that we have monitored have survived. And that really goes to show we are planting them in those sites that we know they're going to do well, versus Cascara, the ramnus at the top, is one of our poorest performers. And that's, I think, because it's one of the only native trees that's small enough to force into small planting strips. So we're kind of putting that tree into places where it doesn't make sense. So ultimately, your site selection is really important. And I am out of time, but in case you wanted to see some trees that did not do well, you'll notice that many of our native evergreens don't do well, and that just means we need to experiment with stock type sourcing or planting cultivation tactics so that we can get more of them, because we're not going to stop planting those species. So that's it. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, everybody. I was invited by the conference committee to give a little bit of perspective on tree selection for Eastern Oregon. So LeGrand is in the northeast corner of Oregon. It's the largest city in the Grand Ronde Valley. We have a population of 13,000. We're surrounded by the Blue Mountains, and the Grand Ronde Valley was the historic summer home of the Nez Perce, the Cayuse, the Umatilla, the Walla Walla, and the Shoshone tribes. So we don't have native ash trees in Eastern Oregon. All of our ash trees have been planted in developed areas as shade trees or ornamentals. We have about 6,000 now trees in our public tree inventory. 500 of those are ash trees, many more on private property, primarily white ash, green ash, and European ash. Ash species were officially removed from our recommended street tree list in 2019. We're currently compiling a list of high-value ash trees that may be targeted for treatment when EAB is found in Union County. And because, like some other cities, about 30% of our public trees are maples. We have a lot of Norway maple, silver maple, red maple. So we've been working for several years to increase the diversity of trees in LeGrand's urban forest. We've also been monitoring the performance of different species in different growing conditions. And so this has kind of given us an opportunity to use this information to help guide us when the time comes to select replacement trees for those ash trees that have to be removed. So when researching suitable trees for our area, we first look at climate and soil. Our average rainfall in LeGrand is around 18 inches. The climate is characterized by warm, dry summers, cold, snowy winters. We have a pretty wide variety of soil conditions, ranging from really lovely, sandy, loamy soils in the drainage basin of the Grand Ronde River to really nasty clay soil in the South Foothills. And a lot of our soils are on the alkaline side, especially, it's especially sad, the potential for losing our ash trees is that they tolerate these less than ideal soil conditions. And up to now, they've been very resilient urban trees in Eastern Oregon. So with tree diversity being a major goal of our planting program, we've tried to source as many different genera and species as possible. Because historically we have very few oak trees in LeGrand, we've added several species: white oak, Quercus alba; swamp white oak, Quercus bicolor; shingle oak, Quercus imbricaria; bur oak, Quercus macrocarpa; chinkapin oak, Quercus muhlenbergii. And of course now I found out that the Mediterranean oak borer's been found in Oregon. So fortunately we have been planting a lot of other trees. I especially like the Macchia. They've been a really great performer where we have limitations on the size of the tree we can plant. Other ones we've been planting recently are river birch, Betula nigra, the European hornbeam, Carpinus betulus, and I can attest to it. It's been a great performing tree as a street tree. Hackberry, that's Celtis occidentalis. Hardy rubber tree is one of the newer trees we've been trying, and we've been really happy with the way it's been performing as a street tree. Where we have room, we've been planting European beech, Fagus sylvatica, and various ginkgo cultivars. We've been trying some Kentucky coffee tree, Gemlocatus dioicus, and we've been really happy with the coffee tree, but they are kind of a slow performer. You have to be patient because they look like a stick for a long time. But we've had some in the ground now for probably 10 or 12 years, and they're really becoming beautiful trees. Hop hornbeam, Austria virginiana; London plane tree, the Platanus eserifolia; lindens, the Cordata americana tomentosa; a bunch of different varieties of elm trees because elms do especially well in our climate, and the Zelkova species. And so all of the trees that we've been planting, with the exception of the river birch, seem to tolerate our alkaline soils pretty well. The swamp white oak, the river birch, and the plane tree have exceeded expectation in areas where we have heavy clay and poor drainage. The one caveat I would make to that is one of the other panelists talked about resilience to storms. And up until last November, the plane trees had been like top of my list for trees in LeGrand. We had an early snowstorm in November before the trees had lost their leaves, and it just decimated our plane trees. They were so sad. So it's still a wonderful tree, but just be aware that there's always something out there waiting to happen. So we currently have 43 genera in our public tree inventory, 133 species and multiple cultivars. So just final thoughts: do your research to learn as much as possible about a particular tree as you can. Experiment with underused species. As the climate shifts, species that weren't suitable in your area may become a good fit. I'm going to try some Nissel sylvatica just to see how they do. Monitor your new species and cultivars to track their performance, and above all, strive for diversity to boost the resilience of your urban forest. Thank you.
One of my favorite trees, and we actually were planting them years ago as street trees and kept having low success rates. And so we actually stopped. We didn't want to keep failing in front of people's houses. So we put a pause on that and actually have a test site up in Baltimore Woods where we've planted a whole bunch of different madrones from 1 gallon up to 15, 20 gallons. We got some from BC that were 9, 10 feet tall. I couldn't believe it. And then did different watering patterns, sun, shade. So we've played around with it. And what we did find is that I think having consistent watering, contractor control away from car doors and dogs and sprinklers, we had more success that way. But we also know we learned certain things that had better performance from the drones. We can't necessarily replicate that at any given site because every different site's different. So we tend to plant them in fringe areas, lower profile sites. We'll often put 2 in a planting hole, a couple feet apart, like smaller ones. They'll like 1 gallon, 2 gallon size, put 2 in a hole. And then maybe if both live, that'll be the kind of multi-stem sort of thing. And if not, we're just kind of hedging our bets and increasing our odds. But we're typically planting 1 gallon up to 10 gallon size. Mahonia Nursery and Vineyards has a pretty good supply of madrones if anyone's interested. And those are a little bit bigger, 2 or 3 footers. We have not. I think, I don't know if some of the older Friends of Trees staff might recall this, but I remember right when we started our partnership, I think there was maybe a particularly cold winter or maybe a bad set of stock. A lot of them failed, I think due to possibly cold hardiness. And I had heard that, and then we kind of stayed away from that. Just Arbutus unido, the strawberry tree, that's what we've planted. Yeah, so no marinas currently for us.
We grow both. Well, we grow the straight species and also grow both ruby vase and Vanessa and Persian Spire. And they're all very successful. I know Matt started planting those, 15 years ago, I think. And they're just, I see them all over town, and they're just excellent. And yeah, we do have good supplies of those, and they always sell out, but which is a good thing. There is another one that we just added. It's been out in the trade for a little while, that was discovered by one of our customers up in Washington, Golden Bell Tower, which has the yellow, very nice tree, good shape, yellow fall color. There's a lot of variation, so there's some good opportunities for new selections.
Early on, we were shipping a lot of our oaks up from California in big box trees, these great, beautiful cork oaks. And then I've literally seen them bend so far that the tip was hitting the ground and they didn't snap. And so part of our solution to that has been to just get smaller stock, get it up here, plant it smaller instead of pulling them out of these boxes, throwing them in the ground. And I feel like that's worked better for us. And we do, it's interesting, the amount of water and accelerated growth. We do taper our water, but I haven't really thought too much about that. Are we possibly overwatering some of our evergreen oaks in the summer? It's hard to manage species per species, site per site, a little less here, a little more there, because we have so many trees. And urban forestry also, we're doing this mass approach. And so it's hard to test soils, custom water, so kind of a blanket approach. And so we may be a little bit overwatering on some of these trees, but I think planting smaller. Yeah. But we've definitely, I've gone out with a broom, like evergreen magnolias, evergreen oaks in my neighborhood. On some snowstorms, I wake up, oh, it's beautiful. Like, oh shit, I got to walk around the neighborhood and check on some of our trees. And we have had a few snap here and there, but not as often as evergreen magnolias. Those seem to be a lot more brittle. But the oaks are pretty resilient. They usually work their way back up. But I really appreciate that comment. Yeah, is it an issue for sure? Anything else you want to add?
I mean, I think it also just speaks to the need for adding that, like, those structural pruning visits in as you're establishing these trees. And one thing that, I mean, it's only anecdotal, but I noticed a lot of, mostly the evergreen conifers in our snowstorm this year, they all kind of hinged right where our arbor tie was. So maybe that's an idea for spreading out our arbor tie so we have more support throughout the tree as opposed to how we normally establish our trees that way.
One of the things about, we get people saying, why don't you grow the evergreen oaks? But we've actually been trialing a lot of trees that we've had a lot of trees on trial we'll probably trial a tree for 5 to 7, maybe even 10 years before we introduce it. And one of the things we trial is whether it can be grown profitably. We can bang our heads against the wall and try to get what people are asking for, but if we can't make a profit on it and it can't be dependably grown through ice storms and so on, we'll lose money. We got a big payroll, so we just have to be practical. And they're saying, well, we've probably trialed crepe myrtle for 30 years ago. There were crepe myrtles in our arboretum and our trials, and it just never has made the grade for us in our climate to be a nursery crop. So that could change, but we've still got some out in the trial blocks, so stay tuned.
My main focus has been trying to get the native trees as far as trying to plant replacements for the ecologically valuable non-natives. That would be a good person. So I know Joel was in here. So Joel is our tree inspector that's really into bird health, as well as we get to talk to Ryan, who's in the other room. But those are really good resources as far as replacements that are still valuable for birds. Unfortunately, I have not observed them, and most of the trees I look at are tiny, so they're not reaching that middle age group where they are becoming really good habitat yet.
We get quite a few of our tree from Schmidt. We recently have switched to bringing them in bare root and potting them and growing them there. But yeah, that is where, and I don't know of any cultivars for hackberry.
Prairie Sentinel is a columnar cultivar that we co-introduced with Kansas State University. Doesn't like this side of the Cascades all that well, but it really is a good performer. And the Magnifica is another cultivar. So pruning is pretty key to hackberries, getting good structure in the nursery and then probably some structural pruning afterwards. And it's a great resilient tree. There's a little sugarberry over here that we're giving away. So if somebody wants to trial that, that's another option. We grow quite a lot of beech. One that I think is underused is the fernleaf beech. It's a little smaller tree and good structure. And if you go to the beech grove at Hoyt Arboretum, it's very impressive.
This is not something that we have tried yet, but I've heard rumor that there is in Arizona a dwarf cultivar of the southern live oak. So you could potentially get an under power line live oak as an option. And where you can find those, I don't know, but that would be a really cool one to try.
Quercus mercinifolia, the bamboo leaf oak. There's some around town. Is a more medium-sized, beautiful tree. That does pretty well in like a 4-foot strip. There's a lot of smaller oaks from the Southwest, like Quercus gregii, and the whole range ranging down to almost shrubby, and you can find them. Sisters Nursery sometimes produces them. You have to put that effort in to source these things. But as far as small conifers, the Van der Wolf's pines performed really well for us. That's a little bit more beautiful tree, smaller scale. But again, I don't know. It's not a great, are we wrapping up? Maybe not great street tree application.
I'll say that if they don't shock out, we've been seeing pretty good success with those Arizona cypresses. We can only get the dwarf cultivar, which is blue ice, that's supposed to top out at about 20, 25 feet. So they either shock out or they start growing like 4 feet a year and need no water. So those are a cool one for a smaller conifer, but they do need to be limbed up because they'll hold their limbs for a long time.
Yeah, I agree. Those are promising.